Hi, welcome back. This is part 2 of the handout Presupposition, Our Most Basic Belief. We are now entering into metaphysics. I hope you're excited. I am. We need to talk about this again. There must be at least something eternal, assuming anything exists at all, which I think we have to assume. That's another thing. Can you doubt that something exists right now? Because it seems like in doubting that something exists, you're existing, right? So I don't know if we could doubt that. So we have something that exists. We need to figure out what is it, and we'll try to do that. So we need to review this argument. Remember this? This is a core question. What is the argument that something must be eternal? You should know this for the rest of your life. The contradictory, nothing is eternal, is self-contradictory by reductio argument. Reductio argument is what we're going to be using. It's called reductio ad absurdum, and it's where you reduce the contradiction to absurdity. This is a kind of argument Socrates often used. So this is an argument we saw on the square of opposition. So I'm going to go back to the iPad, and we're going to talk about this argument in light of our previous discussion where I drew the square of opposition. Remember, this was in our reason and argument conversation. And we said that this is the A corner, this is E, this is I, and this is O. And you remember all this, right? Now we're going to use eternal. We did this once before, but let's go back and do it again. So all is eternal is our A statement. And this is really all that exists is eternal. You might be wondering, why is there only a P term? Where's the S term? Well, the S term would go right here. All that exists is eternal, but since exists is the same as is, then I'm not going to write it twice. All is eternal. What's the contradiction? Remember, this is the contradiction here, CTD. And don't say none is eternal, because that's not it. Think about it before you say it. Okay, you're right. Some is not eternal. All right, now, what's the contrary view? Contrary. And what's the rule for contrary? Remember the rule? Both can't be true. Both can be false. So the contrary is none is eternal. And then what's the contradiction of none is eternal? Do you remember? Can you guess? Yes, you can. Some is eternal. And remember, these are called sub-contraries down here. What was the rule for sub-contraries? Both can be true, both cannot be false. So it has to be one of them has to be true, or both of them have to be true. Okay, and then we have sub-contrary here. Subcon. What was the rule for sub-contrary? Do you remember? If the universal is true, then the particular is true, but not the other way around. Same here. If the universal is true, changed my color. The universal is true, then the particular is true, but not the other way around. You can't go up the square, remember? Only down. All right, let's erase some of this, make it nice and pretty. All right, now we want to talk about the argument. So we want to say, this is true. Is it true? Because this is false. And why was that false? Do you remember? I think you do. It's on this handout. If nothing is eternal, that means everything is temporal. Temporal means everything had a beginning. So if everything is temporal, then everything had a beginning. And if everything had a beginning, then being would have come from non-being. Since being from non-being violates the law of identity, this is impossible. Therefore, nothing is eternal is impossible, and some is eternal must be true. So go back to a previous discussion where we went over the square of opposition with this argument. I believe it was on the sources of popular skepticism, or responses to popular skepticism handout. All right, so going back to our, that's nice. going back to our iPad, I'm going to do some erasing, and we're going to take this corner off. It's not a logical option, and you don't have to worry about it, because in the world's religions and in the world's philosophies, nobody has held to that position. There might be some obscure graduate student playing with the idea out there, but no philosophies have been built on that, because you can't build on that. It makes no sense. But we have some options here. And we also said it's possible that all is eternal includes some is eternal, because if this is true as well. So that's an option. But also we said that these two could be true together as well. So that's also an option. At this point, we don't know which one to go with. So we're going to make a move to combine some is with some is not to get a new contradictory statement. Only some is eternal. All right. So that is going to be a combination of some is and some is not. I get to erase now, get rid of this corner, and clean this corner up. And now we have our two options. We have our two basic beliefs we've talked about in the past. Remember, there are only two basic beliefs. There are many degrees of rational consistency with which a basic view is held. And we also noticed that maybe everything that exists is eternal in the form of matter. That was called material monism. Material monism. Monism means one. All is one. It's eternal and it's material. Very famous view. Then we have spiritual monism. Also a very famous view. It's the exact opposite. All is one, all is eternal, and it's spirit, it's non-material. Let me refresh your memory. Matter means it's extended, it has size, and it's not conscious. So one of the problems for the material monist is to explain consciousness in terms of physical things. Spiritual monism is going to say all is consciousness. There is no material things. So spirit is conscious, self-aware, thinking. And they're going to have a problem with matter. I mean, how do you explain the appearance of material things? And then we have a third option, dualism. And dualism says there are two things that are eternal. Matter is eternal and spirit is eternal. They're co-eternal. And that's a very famous historic position as well. And we'll look at that and see what are the pros and cons of this position. Over here, under only some is eternal, we have theism. And remember, theism is a position that says God creates and God rules. He interacts in the created order. And then there's deism, which says God creates, but he does not rule in the created order. And those are our logical options. Now, there is one more position people often ask about, and it's consistent with Buddhism or with Friedrich Nietzsche's flux doctrine or Heraclitus, and it's let's just say all is impermanence. And this could be Buddhism or Nietzsche or Heraclitus. It's a position that has been tried historically, and it says there is no matter that is eternal. There is no spirit that is eternal. What is eternal is the process of being and becoming. It's a doctrine of momentariness. So here's a moment, here's a moment, here's a moment, here's a moment, here's a moment. What links these moments together? Nothing. So every moment is like a unique event, being from non-being. So there are some serious problems with the doctrine of impermanence or flux. It also tends to have material monism as its, oh, that's nice, as its underlying assumption. Matter is the thing. So we'll look at that as it comes up, particularly in the history of philosophy. You will watch a history video after this video, and you'll see the history of philosophy in the West has gone through cycles. It's gone through all of these positions because they're the logical options. And so all the world's religions and all of the philosophical systems fit under these positions. And that history video will help you to locate them. All right, I'm going to go back to the handout here, and we're going to finish this. So we just went through this argument, and we also went through this. Presupposition is the most basic belief that is used to interpret experience. So remember, we have our foundation and our house. And in that house is you live in that house. And so this idea of what is eternal is your presupposition. And you may be conscious of it or you may not be conscious of it. My job is to help you to become more conscious of it. We also have gone over this idea. There are two presuppositions. All is eternal in some form or other, or only some is eternal. Okay, I just showed you that on the square of opposition. No one is fully conscious or consistent in their presupposition. There is an admixture of both in varying degrees in each person, with one assumption being more basic than the other. I should draw a picture of that. Let me go back to the iPad and draw. So let's say this is a person who has a core belief, and let's say their core belief is theism. They say that there is a God. Maybe that would be easier to write in that circle. They believe in God at the core. But they're raised in a secular society that's material monist. So that would say there is no God. As a person grows up, they are influenced by both beliefs, but one is more at their core. And as one becomes more conscious and consistent in their basic belief, the other belief becomes less and less of an influence. That's what consistency is about. You become more aware of your core belief, and the other belief becomes less and less influential. It could go the other way as well. Let's say a person is born in a culture that is mainly secular and they don't believe in God. I'm doing God and no God because if you look at those two on the squares, that's basically what we have. Over here is God, over here is no God. And let's say they're raised in the West with some Judeo-Christian values that remain. As a person becomes more conscious and consistent in their basic belief, the peripheral belief will have less and less of an influence. That's what it is to become conscious of your view. Now let's go back to the handout. History is reason, or the logos, that's the Greek word for reason, unfolding the meaning of one's presupposition in time. So that's kind of deep, but if you think about your own view, you're going through challenges in life, you're going through questions, you're going through suffering, you are going to be pressed to work out the implications of your basic beliefs through life, through the challenges of life. Now that's in a person's life, but history is like that too. So historically, one or the other of these views must be true. Both can't be true by the law of non-contradiction, and both can't be false by the law of excluded middle. So history is this outworking of these basic beliefs coming to expression, coming to challenges and resolving them, or dying out. So let's look at this. This is more about philosophical systems now than about just individual lives. Logically, all historic belief systems can be classified as all or only some is eternal, and I've shown you that on the square. All is eternal includes material monism, spiritual monism, dualism, pluralism, and these are called being and becoming. So that big B, little b means being and becoming. So being is always, but it's becoming something else. And in the contradictory corner, only some is eternal. Theism, which includes Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and deism. And the little c and the big C is creator and creation. So whereas all is eternal as being and becoming, only some is eternal as creator and creation, meaning the creator is eternal, everything else is temporal. Now I'm going to go back to the square of opposition and talk about one more piece, going back to what we said a minute ago, well maybe it was on the other video, about reductio ad absurdum arguments. So let's go back to the iPad here. All is eternal and only some is eternal. These two positions cannot both be true and they cannot both be false. It has to be one or the other. So if one is true, the other is false. Now, if we go with reason and say we could know by reason and argument, then we should be able to figure out which of these positions should be eliminated. Remember, reductio ad absurdum. We reduce one of these corners to absurdity. So which one is going to be true, which one is going to be false, is going to depend on reason. So we were going to start by looking at material monism first. We'll say, is that true? Then we're going to look at spiritual monism and see, is that true? Then we're going to look at dualism and see, is that true? Then we'll look at theism and deism and ask, is that true? Or either of those true? Now, this is the interesting part, because sometimes when we get into metaphysics, it is set up as a question between atheism and theism, or believers in God and non-believers. But if you look at the square, atheism goes in material monism and theism goes here. But there are other options that need to be recognized and reckoned with. So it's not just atheism and theism, it's different versions of atheism. And some forms of atheism will say everything is God. It's not atheism like there is no God, but what if all is God? That's spiritual monism. Dualism also has spirit. So if an atheist wants to have rational justification for their position, they have to eliminate all of the ones in red. Okay? And let's say, oh, I just pushed the wrong thing again. Let's say a spiritual monist wants to argue for their position. They want to provide rational justification. Then a spiritual monist would have to eliminate these other positions, right? Dualists will have to eliminate these positions, and theists will have to eliminate these positions. So the argument is for everyone, not just atheists and theists, believers in God or doubters in God. If you have a belief at all, then you should give rational justification for that belief. It's on you. If you think this is true, then you should show why the others are not true. That's the reductio ad absurdum. Now, the easy way people take out is, oh, we can't really know. Well, we've already gone through skepticism. You don't get to say that anymore. So yes, we can know, and yes, we could know by reason, and what we're going to do next is marshal out some arguments. So remember, arguments use premises to logically support a conclusion, and we're going to go through one by one and look at what arguments do these positions provide for us such that they would be reasons for us to believe those positions, and what are the arguments against them? How can these positions, how can any of them be eliminated? Well, I can tell you one thing. If they violate the laws of thought at any point, if they say being can come from non-being, that's it. That's out. It's eliminated. If we appeal to ignorance, nobody can really know, that's out. That's not an argument. So we have tools that we could use, and we're going to use them to see, can we know what is eternal? That's the exciting thing we're going to do next, and we're going to start with spiritual monism. But first, I want you to watch a history video, and the history is the history of philosophy in the West. How did we get to where we are today? So take notes on that video as well. It's a video I've used in the past. It's me drawing on the iPad and talking about the history of philosophy. You might think it's boring, but I think it's super important to understand. That will show you the development of these ideas in the West. And the West is the United States, Europe, and if you live in this part of the world, your history. Now, we'll have to look at different history for spiritual monism, but spiritual monism has been tried in the West as well. So we could look at all the logical options, understand their history, and see how did we get to where we are today in this process of challenge and response. Reason, challenging a position, showing it's lacking, and having to respond to that lack by giving a counter argument. So remember, philosophy grows historically by giving arguments, and then counter arguments come up and having to give responses to those counter arguments. This is how history of ideas proceeds. All right, so I invite you to engage in the next stage of our philosophy class.